you have some work of literature that you have experienced, hopefully this year, that you can pull in and use to answer the question. And the question always has two sides to it. Analyze the specifics of the prompt and also analyze how that relates to the meaning of the work as a whole. And so we have to make sure both are covered. Here this year, they decided to go with a quotation. I would say that, in terms of how they've been doing with quotes, about every other prompt uses a quote as the foundation of the question that they build. This is really no different than if you think about some of the questions that they asked you on STAR. I know, don't throw up in your mouth when I say it. But when you think about having to answer those STAR essays, they often give you a quote first, and then they say, think about the quote. And then it's like, now read this. And it's a question. And they're like, it's like, friends are important people in your life. And then the question's like, why is it important to make strong friendships? And you got to write from there. I don't know. They do something similar here. So here they pull from the 2004 novel Magic Seeds. It's wrong to have an ideal view of the world. That's where the mischief starts. That's where everything starts unraveling. So they ask you to select a novel, play, or epic poem in which a character holds an ideal view of the world. Then write an essay in which you analyze the character's idealism and its positive or negative consequences. So if I was going to annotate this question, I would definitely box the word and. Notice that there are two parts to the actual charge of analysis. And if you don't hit one of those two, that's where your score will drop. You haven't fully addressed the question. Then that last part, explain how the author's portrayal of this idealism illustrates the meaning of the work as a whole. They ask you to choose a work from the list below or one of comparable literary merit and not to summarize the plot. So just to kind of review for test taking, when you look at question 3, my suggestion to you now, always, and from the beginning of the year, is to never look at this list of books. Because often you will look and you will see something that you read in a previous year, like Catcher in the Rye. And you'll go, oh, I love that book. Or you'll look at Gatsby and you'll go, oh, that's perfect for this question. And then you're going to start to write the essay. And then about 20 minutes in, you're going to realize, oh, crap, I don't remember this book as well as I thought I did. And you're going to struggle because you go, do I restart this? Do I keep going? I don't know what to do. Cover this list completely. Read the question and then think about what book do you have in your repertoire that you know well that addresses the question best. This will keep you from having that problem, and I'm going to heavily suggest that you pick a book we worked with this year. We have worked with it to a level that you know, understand, and have been guided through how to build those meanings out. And so we have designed our reading to be effective towards this. If you notice, what's a book on this list that seems tailor-made? Well, it doesn't even. If you look at this, what's a book that's like tailor-made for this particular prompt? Death of a Salesman is one that a lot of us chose, and it's actually on the list. It's perfect for this one. As is, even though we didn't read it this year, Gatsby. Most teachers, when they read that was the prompt, they went, oh man, this is a Gatsby year. They wrote this with that book in mind. But does it have to be just those? We're going to talk in a little bit, once we see some student samples and look at some things, about how we can use books outside of those that we have read to answer this question. Now, are they necessarily going to be the best choices? No. But what we want to show is that flexibility. How can you make what you know work well? And so here they give lots of different options. You will notice that even in the greater comments, they will highlight the diversity that they are trying to build into this list and the encouragement to teachers to teach diverse works. And especially here, they try to talk about the complexity that a diverse work shows to students. So you will notice there are lots of books here that are more classic novels, stuff that you would expect. Antigone is written by Sophocles. It is one of the follow-ups to Oedipus. Brave New World, of course, you know from last year. Candide, did you notice that one?
Yeah, that's what well, like when I read the quote, I knew exactly what I was going to write, and then I looked down at the list and it was on there.
Yeah.
So I was like, this is perfect.
There's actually, I thought of you because one of the sample essays on there, it's not a good one though. Right? It's about Candide. And I was like, oh yeah, it's not a great one. Even the Odyssey is listed here. But contrasted with that, they do have some more recent novels that kind of get into that idea of trying to present a more diverse approach. Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde is written by Unit Diaz. I think he's Dominican writer. Great book. Even The Handmaid's Tale, yes, it's the Hulu series too, but the author is Canadian, Margaret Atwood, and so they would see that as diverse. Even, of course, now I'm looking at the list, I'm like, maybe that's about it. I mean, The Bluest Eye, Toni Morrison, more recent. There's a really good essay in our sample set about it. But again, we'll talk about how do we look at a sample essay for this question over a book we don't know. Let's take a look at the greater comments, because again, here we get the insight of what did they want, what did they see, and what are their suggestions for test takers. So here they look at how well did the responses address the course content related to the question. So here they're looking at how students do. And they said generally prompts accessible. Students figured out how to talk about this with some degree. And they really do hit on the fact that, they at least were able to talk about plot summary. They were at least able to include some implicit analysis. So what they're highlighting is most students could at least do the bare minimum skills. They're not trying to say students did really well with it. They're really pointing out bare minimum. They said that nuanced responses were able to draw on the quotation to help find language or craft a critical lens through which to read a literary work. And I think they're able to look at some of those ideas in the quote that don't make it to the prompt, like mischief. How can we use that idea of that's where the mischief starts to help to go? Mischief does have that little bit of that playful connotation, but really getting into the negative consequences of the ideal view. They also talk about how students drew on their knowledge of text to elaborate on both positive and negative consequences. They responded with fairly lengthy essays, as if the accessibility of the prompt invited participation. Some got too far into personal things, which we don't want to do. We want to stay focused on the text. So then they pointed us to, hey, what are the knowledge gaps? What did we see in essays that really need to be kind of fleshed out? One, plot summary instead of focusing on details or elements and explaining how they illustrate their points. I would say that was a point that we struggled with overall, is knowing specific details. You might have been able to tell me all about Willy Loman's idealism, but then when it became, hey, can you point to specific things in the work that illustrate Willy Loman's idealism? That's where we started to fall apart. Or, hey, can you point to specific moments? And when we're talking about that, can you point to a scene? Can you point to a moment? Can you point to an image? That's where we got a little bit less specific, and our essays became more abstract in this way. We relied on the generalized rather than the specific to illustrate our point. Second thing, they said that students focused only on the consequences of idealism or only focused on the work as a whole with no analysis of character. And so this is where they're pointing out students didn't balance their response to all the points of the question. Students relied on overly general, simplistic, or irrelevant statements about the meaning of the work as a whole and didn't connect that meaning specifically to the prompt. And so this is where we tried to push to theme but we didn't really focus on, hey, what does that theme have to do with idealism or the consequences of idealism? And so they go, hey, well, what should teachers work on? One thing they suggest is moving students away from seeing a text as having a singular theme. We have done that. Think about what we did with Wuthering Heights. I forced you to write 3 essays over 3 separate themes. Being able to see how different ideas are embedded in a text and how those ideas are developed separately. 2, to be able to model for students these kinds of critical lenses from an abstract concept like idealism. So being able to see it in different ways, and they even suggest kind of challenging a student that if you see it in one particular way, asking you to then say, okay, now tell me the other side of it. If you see this as idealist, great. Now tell me how we can see it as pessimistic. Not to introduce the concept, as they say, that anything is possible, but instead to help students see contradictions and paradoxes in their own positions and anticipate the naysaying voices in an argument. We have to remember that to some degree, what we are creating is an argument about the meaning of the work. And so we want to still consider those same approaches of, hey, I don't want to write myself into a hole. I don't want to create a logical fallacy. I want to have a clear idea of meaning. So those are some of the suggestions, and especially on the summary part, we want to try to balance out for specific details. I want to look at a sample essay to start that is not great. I want to preface with this. It is not a great essay, but what it is a workman essay that does just enough. On that big, giant Google Doc that has all these handwritten samples, this sample is on page 73. It's marked as sample HH, and it is a sample that focuses on Gatsby. Now, I'm telling you ahead of time, this is one that you will see things like plot summary, generalized statements, the pieces that they pointed out as issues on that grader document. You're going to see it. I want you to look for those. And as you read, I want you to think, how could we improve this? What could we do that would make this a little more effective? So take a few minutes to read HH. I know that it's handwritten, so it might take a little bit longer. That's okay. And then we'll discuss, what did you see and what did you notice? Anybody need more time with this one? Okay, tell me what you notice about this essay. Yes, there seems to be a lot of repetitiveness, and where you have heard me use this word for what you're seeing is assertions. You notice that again and again they simply assert what the meaning is according to them, or they assert what their point is. A great example of that kind of is here in this paragraph where they just keep saying money, 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 money. How could we fix this? Like, even if we look at just this paragraph about money, we're familiar to some degree with Gatsby. What could we say to specify some of the points in that paragraph?
His lavish lifestyle, he tried to attract to the kind of.
Absolutely. We could point out how he's spending and using his money to attract her in and give those examples. Do we have to get into what things at the parties are there and that specific? Not necessarily. But at least if we could start to move that way, we're going to improve that quality. Could we maybe bring in how he is making his money to contrast the difference between Tom and Gatsby? Remember that Gatsby is earning his money illegally. We also have a major point brought up in the novel, how Gatsby is of new money that acquired within his lifetime, whereas Tom is old money. There's a refinement to how he spends and what he does. Could that help to support what we're seeing? Absolutely. But are we to the point with saying any of that I'm going to open a page and point to a specific line or a specific paragraph? Not yet. But at least we're seeing those pushes up that we can take this quality and improve it a bit. Other things that you noticed reading this essay?
It's not really like, they don't really explain the points. They're just like, this is it, and that's that.
Yeah. So in line with that repetition and assertive quality, there's no development of their ideas to some degree. They're just more stating this is what it is, and they might explain a bit, but they don't really take it to how it's important or how it ties into the prompt as much. They're just kind of putting their pieces out there. With both of those things in mind, let me counter with this question. Does the student answer the question? He does. I'm assuming. Sorry, I'm assuming a gender. They answer the question. They answer all the parts of the question. Did they do it well? No. But at the same time, does this student understand what they've read? And that's one of the things we want to be aware of. Is this a great essay? No. But guess what? If we look at that old style of scoring that this is indicative of, this essay earned a 5. So on our current test, a 5 would be kind of similar to earning 3 total points, getting the thesis plus probably a 2 on the row B score, where we're talking about evidence and commentary. This is going to come in at a 3. But when we crunched numbers on Monday, we saw that if we can get you 60% of the multiple choice, and we can get you 3 points on the essays, you are likely in line to earn a 3 and get college credit for this. Remember, if you are going to a publicly funded Texas State University next year, they are required to offer you some kind of credit for scoring a 3 on this test. Laws exist in other states as well. Is anyone going out of state? No? Okay, so then that statement works. As long as you are going to a university that accepts federal, state funding or federal funding, or state funding, they have to give you something. So if we're looking, is this a great essay? Nah. Can we see how to improve it? Yeah. But here's the big thing. This is going to keep them in line to get that credit. So I wanted to start with a sample that comes from a book that we're familiar with, because if you look at the other release samples that are here in the handwritten bit, they're going to be from books that you're not familiar with, you haven't read before. And so for students, it's often difficult because they're like, Well, how do I approach looking at this sample? I don't even know the book, so how do I know if they're summarizing or not? Let's take a look at one of their higher scored ones. Maybe if my computer doesn't want to be dog crap today, we can look at one. Come on. This whole thing frees up? Awesome. Okay. Let's see what we can do. Okay, so while I reset, how about we do this? We just looked at one that's kind of middle of the road. And I would say that this particular one, I saw it move. I would say that this particular one, and part of why I wanted to pick it, it is fairly indicative of what I saw reading the mass of essays. This is not to say you specifically in the point of finger and say your essay is just like this one. It might not be. But overall, that double H sample is pretty similar to what I was seeing from lots of students. Now that I have this, let's look at this one. So this is page 60. This is the highest scored sample. This one scored a 9 on the old rubric. And it is over Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye. It is a book about a young African-American girl and sort of the struggles that she sees. It is a heart-wrenching, tough book to read. So if you're going like, oh, this got a really good score on the test, I should totally read it. Just be aware. Like, there are some definite heavy things that it touches on. I want to use this one as a sample to go, hey, how can you use these other release samples, because we have plenty of them, to help to guide your own writing? And we're going to contrast what we saw with the Gatsby one with what we see in this one. Let's start with the introduction and looking at the thesis itself. So remember, the Gatsby one had a thesis that was, it was based on the prompt and it was pretty much workmanlike. It did enough, but it didn't answer really particularly specific. What do we have here? American culture has long valued whiteness over blackness. We symbolize purity and cleanliness with white and wickedness and filth with black. These symbols, however, can have a far-reaching impact on race relations within the country. In The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, Pecola strives for the ideal of whiteness, but in inevitably falling short of the standard, becomes destroyed. Morrison tactfully establishes symbols of the white ideal, which Pecola covets for their beauty, only to demonstrate their true ugliness when applied in the real world. What do you notice about, who cares? We don't need to know anything about the book. What do you notice about the quality of the writing here in this introduction versus the introduction that we read about Gatsby? Yes, you get a sense of an important part of the book without them having to summarize. Do we know how old this girl is? Nope. Do we know anything about her situation other than the fact that she's black but has a sense of wanting to be white? Nope. We don't have any of that. A summary would want to fill you in. It would feel the need to go, I need to catch my reader up. You don't. You got to trust that the reader knows just as much as you do. That's not to say that you're going to see this in your introduction or in your place, but we've got to remember, we can just state and move on. What do you notice about their thesis?
And it's not like formulated.
There's not a formula to it. We don't see that in Toni Morrison's novel, The Bluest Eye. Idealism is shown as, and we don't just fill in the blanks. This is someone that is in control of their own writing. And when we look at this being a composition test, we have to understand that, especially on the literature test. Last year, you could get away with a formula on the Lang test, 100% guaranteed. This year, they don't reward formula on this. They want to see your thinking, and they want to see how you can talk about those complexities. Look at the style of this one as well. Before she introduces her thesis, look at how she leads into the idea that she wants you to understand. She knows that she's going to talk about the struggle this girl has about wanting to be white. And so notice that she has the sentence that talks about our understood metaphors of the two colors. That is someone that is funneling that idea. I'm trying to put my hands in. When we do introductions, we know that it follows that funnel concept. Our reader is coming in with the basics of context. They know that what we are going to talk about is a novel, idealism, consequences. They know those things. So we've got to get them to our main idea. This writer does that really well. Let's look at where they go in the next paragraph just to kind of show how do we look at this without knowing the book to really look at how we can improve our own work. Okay, Pecola, like the rest of her society, praises symbols of white beauty. Principally, Pecola takes a liking to a Shirley Temple cup at Claudia's house. Morrison describes Pecola's infatuation. There's another word there, I can't make it out. With the pink face on the cup, America's sweetheart. A little black girl like Pecola understandably catches onto this beloved figure, given her treatment by her community. Most people, including her own mother, scorn Pecola's ugliness and blackness. Just like every other black girl and woman, Pecola learns to strive for what she is not. The acceptance Shirley Temple represents captures Pecola, and she becomes obsessed with the dream of having blue eyes. We don't have to even read the rest. Let's just look here. 1. If you knew this book, could you open it up to this scene and put your finger on that moment? Notice that she's able to talk about a specific moment in the book, not just an ideal that's going on, but how do we see this represented in the text? When we've taken notes over novels and plays, we've talked about what are the key scenes. What are those moments that you should know that we can connect in? Here, this student is using that to her advantage. But is she just focused on that one scene? In other words, is she only describing what literally happens in that one scene, or is she able to draw context towards, hey, this idea was brought up earlier in the book and it's cemented through this moment? Notice that we have the idea of her mom brought in and solidified by this image she sees on the cup. Did you notice the use of the complex sentence? Is every sentence written the same way in this essay? Sentence variety is really important. And so students that are scoring way up here in this higher part too, they are also varying up their sentences and they're using that style to their advantage. Now, we are looking at a 9 essay. I know. Am I looking at you and going, hey, this is where you should be in 5 weeks? No. That would be completely unfair to any of you. 9s are freaks, man. Kids that could write 9s on this old rubric, they're just like monsters. Like they'd open their mouth and gold and magic would come forth. Like I would hope just not to break them. This is the kind of thing that I don't want you to strive towards. I have to get this or I fail. No, this is the top of the mountain. But think about it. That one that we started with, that Gatsby one, was it a pretty essay? Heck no, but that kid's going to get college credit. Can you find a middle ground to hit? Absolutely. And that's what we want to look at. Notice here how we focused on this essay. We didn't focus on the details about the book. We looked at how are they using evidence? How are they constructing and answering the question? And how are they structuring it? What do their sentences look like? What are the surface details of their writing giving us? This is how we can use these samples when we don't know anything about the book itself. What do we notice that they do well in addressing the question? So you've got a whole bank here because you've got really the 8, the 7, the 6 score, which all of those are really good, strong essays. Plus you have the other document from College Board, which is here, that gives us additional samples on top of it. Did everyone read Lord of the Flies in 10th grade? So here, this student writes a 6-point essay over Lord of the Flies. They get all the points on it. So if you're looking for another one that's really successful over something that you know, we absolutely do have that. I want to take a moment to talk about, hey, what are other approaches we could use here? Because the majority of people, they wrote about Death of a Salesman, and it worked great. Absolutely. But what should we be doing in getting ready to go to the actual test? And what do we do if we prep and we're just, we don't know? So first, you've got to understand that there is a design in place for this class. We have specifically designed the curriculum and the books that we read for success on this test. Most lists will tell you 3 books are what you need in order to write any question that they ask you about here. Your 3 H's. That if you have a good understanding of these 3 works, they have broad thematic understanding, you could pretty much answer whatever they give you here. And you might be like, you can? Even this one? Who has an ideal view of the world in Heart of Darkness? In Heart of Darkness?
Oh, my bad.
That's okay. Think about Kurtz. Kurtz comes to Africa with that ideal that every station should be a beacon of light along the way, of doing the work of white man's burden. But then we notice that that idealism becomes a problem when he realizes the freedom that Africa allows him. That when he puts into place his plan for how to do good, it ends up corrupting him and bringing us to the figure that we have. Think about Wuthering Heights. Who's a character that has an ideal view of the world? Now remember, we're not necessarily saying it has to be idealistic, positive, but a certain definite view of this is how the world should be. Heathcliff. Revenge should be even and equal. Opportunity should be opened if you can earn it. He has very definite bits. And we notice, we've said this, throughout the course of the book, Heathcliff's influence, because of his revenge, becomes like a cancer upon this family, these 2 families. And most of the deaths can all be linked to his influence in one way or another. People die because of the choices he makes or the situations he puts them in. Hamlet. Who has an ideal view of the world? Hamlet. Justice has to be served. My father was the greatest figure that has ever lived, and my uncle is a trash sack of dead raccoons. We can talk about how these works do it, and it's a great way that you can prepare. A quick Google search will take you to a list that I use all the time in prepping for classwork. If you just put into Google AP Literature open-ended prompts, you will find my friend Miss Effie's page. I don't actually know her, but from my understanding, she's this old woman who started this page years ago, and College Board hates her guts because what she started doing is publishing what is every single question that they have asked for every year on this test for question 3. She also kept a list. What is every book that they have ever listed on this test? You can find that. So if we're looking to prepare, it takes nothing for you to pull up that list of all the questions and just go, hey, this one asks about an ideal view of the world. What books did we read that I could use to answer it? How would I do that? You also have the tool that you could use to help do your thinking. Remember when we've done speed dating opportunities and we have those little 7-minute blocks where it's like, hey, do out your thinking, write your thesis. How would you approach this? I've given you the tools. It's there. And so as we get ready to prepare for the test, what should you do to get ready for question 3? Okay, first, I would suggest that you pick at least one of these works that you are extremely familiar with and that you know well, and you study it. You go back and you review your notes, Spark Notes, Schmook. You look at videos. You get those details of the book back into your brain. Then we want to pick something that is a contrasting work, maybe even 2 contrasting works. Notice that for the majority of these, they fall this one is 1900, but roughly pre-20th century. Maybe choose a 20th century work like Death of a Salesman or Waiting for Godot, which we'll talk about next week. We're going to add to your list in the next couple of weeks a couple more works. Over the course of April, we're going to read a pre-20th century novel. We're also going to work with humor before the test and read a 19th century Oscar Wilde play that's going to introduce how do we deal with humor? How do we work with that? So pick a work that contrasts. If you have lots of themes that are serious, go with something that kind of talks about different themes. You want 2 or 3 books ready to go in your tool belt that you know extremely well that cover diverse themes so that regardless of what question they ask you, you have a work ready to go that we have read. And we will do some things over the next few weeks to help to prepare you for that. But like we said, that preparation is going to come from you, and it's that ownership part of the test. This question is the only one that we can actually study for. I don't know what kind of poem they're going to give you. I have no clue on the prose. I can tell you you're going to have to pick some work that we've read and that you're familiar with. So we can get you ready for this one, and we will. Tomorrow, we're going to rewrite 1 essay, and you're going to have tomorrow and Monday to do this. I'm not going to tell you which one to rewrite. It is totally up to you. I have all the grades from Canvas backed up in a separate document that does not live on Canvas. It has all the essay grades. So as we do rewrites, that will get updated and shifted with rewritten grades. Next week, I will look back and say, hey, what is the highest of the 3 essay grades? I will snatch that one out and I will put it in Skyward. That one will be closed off. The other 2 grades will go on next 6 weeks. But you can absolutely rewrite those for weeks to come. We've got plenty of time. So you can get that grade to where you want, and you can use it as a tool to help prepare for the test. Sound good?